Welcome back. This is part 2 of our German Unification series. Now, in the last video, we talked about Otto von Bismarck a lot, which is essential in understanding the unification of Germany. So today, we're going to outline how that actual blood and iron policy worked, right? And so the iron policy, which you guys kind of talked about, or we saw in the last section, outlined how he used industry to unify northern Germany. That's investing in rail lines, investing in steel production, investing in coal production, oil eventually. And so this large investment of industry in the northern parts of Germany are going to give a unifying nature to Prussia, right? It makes them kind of the economic center. And if you're the economic center in his mind, then you are the center. Now, Austria at this time still is the cultural center of Germany. Politically, they have the most power. We learned that he tried to ostracize them in those congresses, which he did very, very successfully. Now, Bismarck is not just going to ostracize them from that Congress. He's going to make sure he ostracizes them from all of Europe. And Bismarck was an excellent person when it comes to propaganda. He really understood how to use the media to instill a hatred of his opponents. Now, the blood part of this blood and iron policy is going to be war. And Bismarck knew that they had to go to war, but he could not look like the aggressor. And that's always the thing Bismarck does. And he does this remarkably well. He'll never be the one who declares war or goes to war for the bad reason. He doesn't make it look like it's a war of conquest, even though it is. It's going to be three different wars. And he'll make it seem like, oh, well, they were just, attacking us or attacking German rights or insulting us. And so he always makes Prussia look like the good guy in these wars. So if you're going to go to war and you're going to unify Germany, you need to get Austria out the picture. However, he didn't quite know if the Prussian military could single-handedly take out Austria because largely, the Prussians hadn't really seen the Austrians in combat in a while. And, a lot has changed since Napoleonic Wars, right? Prussia has invested heavily in military technology. So they're starting bolt-action rifle production, cartridge-based bullets and everything like that. They have fast-moving artillery. The way war is being fought is changing in Prussia. What they didn't know was, were the Austrians doing it? And the answer is going to be no. So the first war, where is that going to take place? Well, if you're thinking about doing this, you don't do Austria first. You don't go to Russia or France or the big countries. You pick someone small, and that small country happened to be Denmark. And if you're like, I don't know where Denmark is, think of it like Germany's hat. Okay, it's just north of Germany. It sits on it like a nice little crown. Well, in Denmark, the king died, and there were two successors that could have been put into the Danes, royalty. And there was a pro-German, and then there was an anti-German. Obviously, Prussia supports the pro-German. Well, the anti-German wins, and this is okay. Bismarck is okay with this. But as that decision was being made, he is making a lot of public newspaper kind of statements that are insulting the or anti-German person. And he's making sure that the people in Prussia have an anti-Dane sentiment. The other thing he does is he brings Austria in on this too and says, look what's happening, right? They're insulting the German people. And then the Danes do something that actually helps him out. They begin to pass a series of laws in their southern territories. So in southern Denmark, you had Schleswig and Holstein. These are two German places. About 80% of their population speaks and is German. And so they passed a couple of different laws that didn't allow them to vote. So they took away voting rights. And of course, Prussia was, advocated for that. They said, no, you can't take away their voting rights, blah, blah, blah. And then Austria was like, yeah, how dare you insult the German people? You have the various other northern German city-states are like, yeah, you can't do that. And they go back and forth. Long story short, Napoleon or Bismarck is going to negotiate with a couple different people. One, he negotiates with Napoleon. So he makes sure that Napoleon is not going to side with anybody. He makes sure that he's neutral. And he makes sure the Russians are neutral. Now, the Austrians are going to help out a little bit. Not a lot. The Prussians kind of steamroll on through. So they declare war in 1864 on Denmark. And it's a very, very quick war. The Prussians were using kind of a newer military tactic. They divided their military into smaller units. They wanted fast-moving soldiers, a lot of cavalry involved in fast-moving artillery. They saw the Austrians fight, and the Austrians were still fighting in semi-Napoleonic warfare types. Think like early Civil War in the United States. And so Prussia was not very impressed by Austria's military capabilities. Now, long story short, the war isn't that important. It ends in a matter of months, and the Prussian army, completely wins, and it's this big-time victory. Then comes the political part, and this is where Bismarck is, again, the Bond villain who wins, the genius, because he begins to negotiate for the territories of Schleswig and Holstein. He says Denmark can't have those territories. They're German. And he goes to Austria and says, we want them all. Now, he does this because he knows that Austria will not let them have both of those territories. And so Austria throws a fit about it publicly. How dare Prussia do this, blah, blah, blah. Bismarck, in turn, is going to use those Austrian statements, and he's going to publish them in all the newspapers in Prussia. He'll publish them in northern Germany. But secretly, he knew this was going to happen anyway. He didn't care. And so he gives them the southern territory anyway. He gives them Holstein, which is that southern territory. Now, that borders Prussia, by the way. So that's going to be an interesting thing there. Now, for the next couple of years, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, for 2 years, basically, Bismarck is going to release a whole bunch of false accusations that the Austrians are manipulating the Holsteinians. They should let them be independent. They're not letting them be independent. They're not letting them vote in elections because Austria didn't really do the elections for all those territories. And they have a whole bunch of anti-Austrian sentiments. And they even kind of threaten Austria a couple of different times. Now, Bismarck knows if he declares war on Austria, the French will intercede. They're not going to let Austria, which is one of the most powerful countries in Europe, and really the leaders of the Congress of Vienna, he's not going to let them just get destroyed. So he has to make sure the Austrians declare war on him. And so to do that, it's a whole bunch of propaganda, right? He even releases statements that the Austrians insulted the French, the Russians. It didn't matter who it was. They were releasing propaganda in that manner, and people bought into it, and they believed it wholeheartedly. Now, they do make a whole bunch of fake Austrian statements towards Wilhelm, who eventually become Wilhelm the First of Germany. But Wilhelm, right, the leader of Prussia, actually is starting to negotiate with the Austrian royalty because he doesn't want a war. And Bismarck's like, are you sure? Because look what they said about you. They called you a coward. They said you don't have the stomach for a real war. Defeating Denmark was nothing. Austria is a real country. And Wilhelm kind of gets a little aggravated with this. At the same time, we have Italy now vying for Venice. And Prussia is going to make an outward statement supporting the Italian annexation of the territory of Venice. Now, he does this knowing that the Austrians are about to go to war with the Italians again, knowing that the French supported the Italians the first time, and knowing that doing this will cause Austria to declare war on Prussia, which they did. And so they went right into his plan. So Austria declares war on Prussia, and France says, you know what? You guys fight it out. Y'all are German. This is about nationalism. This is about Germany. And that was kind of, again, something that Wilhelm and Bismarck had kind of put into Napoleon's ear. And so this is a short war. It only lasts about 30 days. So Austria, right, who historically is one of the most powerful countries in Europe, is steamrolled in 30 days. And the reason they was because that Prussian military, it only got better in 2 years. They looked at everything they did. They revamped it. We have a general, right, Helmut von Moltke, and he's one of the most modern generals in the world at the time. And he has modernized how cavalry moves and how infantry moves. He's developed, we're not going to call it like a Blitzkrieg because it's not, right? Blitzkrieg involves planes and tanks, and they didn't have that. But in a lot of ways, think of how like Sherman's march was in the Civil War, where they march across and they go across territory they never should have gone with. Now, imagine if Sherman's march, they could have done it without marching. They could have gone with railways. Remember, they railroaded all these territories. And so Prussia, using other German soldiers as well, they're going to send troops via railway very, very quickly to Austrian territories, all in Germany, take them over, and then eventually invade Austria. It's so successful that Prussia even threatens to take over all of Austria. And in fact, Wilhelm, so insulted by the previous insults, is like, maybe I should take it over. And this is where Bismarck steps up, because Bismarck knows exactly what happens if you do that. The concert of Europe is very specific. They don't want people to become too powerful. And if Austria were to be completely taken over and annexed by Prussia, that would be a little too much. And the French would intercede, and particularly the British would intercede as well. So Bismarck is going to say, look, Wilhelm, I know we got him, but we can't do that, okay? We can't intercede on that type of stuff. And so Wilhelm is going to listen to Bismarck. Bismarck's got him this far. He's going to carry him to the finish line, so he's going to listen to him, right? And so they pull back. Austria gets to keep their crown, sort of, right? Because we know what's going to happen after that. Dual monarchy, Austria-Hungary, that we get in World War I. This is going to cause a whole bunch of nationalism ramifications. We really look at this as a downfall of Austria. This is when they start to really kind of fall off. And so I think that's kind of important to make note of. Now, from 1866 to 1870, the Prussian army is going to be revamping itself. They still invest heavily in industry all throughout Germany now. It's not just going to be northern Germany. Now it's southern Germany as well. They even make little treaties with Belgium to negotiate some rail lines and everything else in there. And these are all very important factors, because going into 1870, we see a push by Otto von Bismarck to create a war with France. He needs something to unify the German states. You can't unify the German states with a war with Denmark, okay? Austria, maybe, but they're already out of it. Italy, not really relevant at this time. France is the most powerful country in mainland Europe outside of Russia, and he did not want to go to war with Russia because of numerical reasons, right? We talked about he went to Russia. He saw how many people there were. He saw how long it took to get to St. Petersburg, so he wasn't about to go have an army march that far. Wasn't going to make the same mistake that Napoleon made, right, earlier in the 1800s. So Bismarck had said, right, that the opportunities have presented themselves multiple times. Well, a perfect opportunity presented itself when the King of Spain died and there was a contest for the rulership of Spain. And we see monarchies kind of debate over this all the time, right? You know, the French are like, well, we want a pro-French Spanish monarch. The Germans want a German guy. And, you think back to England, right? They actually brought in someone from Hanover, right? George I, to be the King of England. And so Bismarck is going to back a German-descended guy who could actually ascend to the throne of Spain. And France is insulted by this, and Napoleon is like, how dare you, right? If anything, it should be a French person, or maybe a Spanish person, if we're being real, right? That would make more sense. But, these are monarchies in the 1800s, so what do we know? But anyway, there's a lot of anti-French sentiment that starts to build up, and Bismarck begins to secretly release varying degrees of communication that are insulting to the German people. And so Napoleon the Third is going to be kind of like credited with a whole bunch of quotes about the German people, calls them barbarians, unintelligent, all these different things. You couldn't have a German ruling Spain because he wouldn't know how to eat with a knife and fork, things like that. And honestly, he didn't really say many of these things at all. What gets really funny is when you start to look at what Napoleon does going forward. Napoleon says, you know what, this Bismarck guy is sketchy. I'm going to avoid him. And so Napoleon begins to send telegraphs directly to Wilhelm in Prussia to say, hey, can we fix this? And Wilhelm's like, yeah, we don't want war. And Bismarck's sitting there like, are you an idiot? I'm trying to make you the king of Germany, right? The emperor of Germany, and you're trying to negotiate a treaty with Napoleon the Third. And so Bismarck is going to start editing these telegrams, or we think he does, and it makes them more insulting towards Napoleon. And so the responses Wilhelm will give back seem to be good, but when they're translated to French, they seem to be fairly insulting for whatever reason. And Napoleon gets incensed by this, and then he demands a public apology by all of Germany. All of Germany should apologize for supporting a German to ascend to the throne of Spain and for basically insulting the French. This is what Bismarck needs. All of Germany apologize to the French? Are you kidding? You're the ones who ruined Europe in the early 1800s by invading all of us. So he says, look, the last time Napoleon got mad at the German people, he conquered them all. So they start rallying all the different German city-states. They say, you know what? No, France, we're not publicly apologizing. In fact, forget you, right? And so Napoleon is going to start to kind of really give a little charge at this, and he gets really, really mad, and he sends one last overture to Wilhelm. Wilhelm's reply is fairly insulting, probably because Bismarck added to the reply, but whatever. And so the war is going to be declared, but it's not going to be declared by Prussia. It's going to be declared by France. Napoleon III, remember, a romantic monarch. I told you this was important. His honor has been insulted. The French people's honor has been insulted. And so he declares war because of that. And that's what's going to unify Germany, right? This French guy getting mad because he was insulted. Now, look, Napoleon III idolized the first Napoleon, right? His uncle. He idolizes him. And so he is going to try and lead an army in combat. And I got news for you. The apple fell way far away from the tree and down a cliff into a ravine and then floated down the river, okay? Like, it did not work very well for Napoleon. He was not a good military leader. The other thing was, he didn't know where the Germans were going to invade from. He kind of thought they would hit that central belly that Germany and France touch on. And, Germany raises an army, or Prussia raises an army filled with Germans from all around the country, or all around the territory, of over 1 million, 3/4 of which are Prussian, but over 1 million. That was one of the largest armies that was created at that point in time. Armies just simply weren't that big. And so they invade, but they feint. They invade, they fake out in the middle, and then they're going to go through Belgium. They're going to use those rail lines to transport hundreds of thousands of soldiers through Belgium. And then from Belgium, they're going to sweep down and encircle Paris. Napoleon is going to be captured in the first month of fighting. The war itself starts in 1870. It starts July of 1870, ends in January of 1871. Fighting is over in basically 2.5 to 3 months. The rest of it is more or less negotiating peace treaties. Napoleon is going to abdicate the throne when he's captured, and the French Republic republic will be formed. They will have their fifth constitution since the revolution. So lucky number 5. This one will stick, actually. It'll stick all the way until 1940 when, World War II and all that stuff happened. But the French are going to be encircled in Paris. They're eventually going to surrender, and it's going to be all done for our buddy Napoleon and for France. Now, as the war ends, Bismarck is going to use this time to unify Germany, right? Together, we could beat the most powerful country in Europe. And so all of the princes of Germany are going to gather at the Palace Versailles. And if you should know about what Versailles is obviously an immensely important thing in history. And so they gather at the Palace Versailles in the Hall of Mirrors. And there's a very famous painting by Anton von Werner. And this painting is the unification of Germany in the Palace Versailles. And I'm being very, very weird with this because I probably should just put a graphic. But if we look at this painting, I want you to notice in this painting, you see all the soldiers and they have their swords raised. And it stops at this guy in the white. Now, that guy in the white is Bismarck. Okay? And so think about what you know about paintings. Generally, the center of the painting is the focal point. We have the sword saluted at Bismarck. The people on the podium are looking at Bismarck. That's because this painter knows that Germany was unified not by Wilhelm the first Kaiser, right, of Germany, but it was unified by Otto von Bismarck. And so Germany becomes a empire, the German Empire, in 1871. Bismarck will be the head of government of that empire. It will have a parliament and a monarchy. He fights with that parliament constantly, but he becomes the leader of it. So that's how it happened. Right? And so when I said Bond villain who wins, think about it. I mean, this dude just went nuts and got all this stuff done. Absolutely incredible that Bismarck was able to pull this off. Some luck involved, yes, but by and large, kind of by his own political grit. Now, going forward, what's going to happen with Germany, and we'll probably have another video on this, Germany, just like Italy, is going to have some issues, right? Unification ain't easy. And the cultures are different in these city-states, and it's very hard to get them all to kind of unify. One of the things that Bismarck tried to do is this thing called Kulturkampf, where he tried to tax the church and kick them out of schools, and they had a huge protest. They said, church has been running German schools forever, and that was Catholic Church, Lutheran Church, all the different churches in Germany. And so Bismarck tried to make it a-religious, and that didn't really work out too much. Bismarck, though, will give universal male suffrage in Germany. One of the other big things that they will put into play to avoid any type of liberal revolutions, Germany is going to put into play a series of reforms, including old age pension funds, like we think of with Social Security, which the Prussians had in their military, but not in their state, and they had put it in place in all of Germany in the 1880s, as well as universal health care coverage, which don't equate it to modern healthcare coverage, but it's one of the earliest state-run healthcare type services that we see. Germany is going to obviously also form one of the largest university systems in the world. Germany becomes a scientific mecca, one of the most industrial states, obviously, in the world, and they're only going to get larger. The other thing we should know is Bismarck's done with war. He says war was made to unify. Now we need to have peace, and he fights for the next 20 years to maintain peace. And it's not going to be until Wilhelm II takes power and he fires Bismarck that Germany will then start to be outwardly aggressive to its partners in Europe and ultimately get into World War I. But that's a story for another day. So I hope you enjoyed these two videos in our unification of Germany. If you're in my AP World class, obviously we're going to have to see a little essay as a result of this comparison, unification of Italy, unification of Germany. I've given you a whole bunch of different kind of comparisons to go by, but it's up to you to make sure you do the work. Don't let this coronavirus get you down, because we're going to keep having videos every other day or so until it's over. So until next time, later.